Hey guys, John here. Welcome back to the course, How to Use Hive 2. This is video 11, and today we're talking about function generators. So today's video is going to be a little bit long because there is quite a lot to cover with these things because they're simplistic in a way, but also very confusing and kind of ominous in another way. So let's go to a new preset as always, and for today we're going to be in the scope for most of the video because it's kind of nice to see what we're doing and hear what we're doing. So basically, long story short, a function is basically an envelope, right? But the difference is we have an attack phase and we have a decay phase. So we don't have a decay, or we don't have a sustain, or we don't have a release, right? Just attack, and once that's finished its value, then it just starts decaying, and that's it. That's the basic thing I can tell you for now. So to make sure we see this and hear this, let's grab our cutoff and kind of put it maybe somewhere halfway-ish. And on the function, let's grab this crosshair where it says envelope, which we're going to be looking at, and drag this to the cutoff and then give it some depth, something like that. And then let's also drag this envelope crosshair to the scope so we can actually see the shape of this envelope. And let's hit some notes. So we see almost like clicks in little spikes. So by default, the attack and decay are very low values, so really 0, I guess, here in this case. And it's basically saying that the attack phase is very fast and the decay phase is very fast, which to our slow eyes is just going to be a little spike like that. However, if we increase this kind of substantially, maybe halfway for the attack and the decay, and then play a note, we can see that envelope in all of its glory. Okay, so that's the basic envelope functionality, right? And the function 2 has the same thing, another envelope here. The difference is between the first function and the second one is we have these other things like rise, we have still, and then we have fall, and then we have move. So these extra 4, the rise, still, fall, and move, are going to be gates, right? So the first ones are going to be envelopes, right? Attack and decay. And then the other 4, rise, still, fall, and move, are going to be gates. And depending on if the gate is open or if the gate is closed, basically a 1 or a 0 value, it is basically determined on what this envelope here is doing. So with that said, it's kind of easy to see this, right? So let's get rise and put this also in the bottom here. So we're looking at the envelope and then we're looking at the rising. So let's hit some notes and let's take a pause and kind of look at this. So rising. So whenever this envelope here on our first function is rising, so when it's in the attack phase and it's rising to the peak value before it hits decay, that's going to say this gate needs to be on. So whenever the envelope's going up, then we have a value of 1, which is why this gate here is open. And as soon as we start to, as we can kind of scroll in here a little bit, right here, as soon as it starts to decay, then it says, okay, we're finished with the rising spot. Now shut the gate off, and it is off. So that's kind of what this rising does. So if we unfreeze that, let's take a look at still. So let's go for the next one here, and let's go to function 1, and let's take a look at still. So let's freeze this right here. Now, still, what does that mean? There's nothing happening. The envelope is still. It's at rest. It's not getting fired. It's not getting triggered by anything. So this function 1 gives a value of 1, right? If it's still, then it says, okay, the gate needs to be open. However, if there's any movement going on, this is going to go to 0. So as soon as I start playing some notes, all this motion right over here, this envelope being fired right over here, it's moving, it's attacking, it's decaying, it's doing its thing. This is, okay, there's motion going on, it's not still, so it's going to be 0 and the gate is closed. That's how that functions there. So let's kind of go to the other one. So envelope 2 is going to be basically the opposite, right? So as we saw with rise, once the envelope is rising, then the gate's going to be open. Fall is the exact opposite. It says if something is falling, once the decay is going down, then the gate's going to be open. If we're in a rising phase, then it's going to be closed. And then move is the opposite of still. So if something is moving, then it's going to be positive. The gate's going to be open. If something's still, nothing's happening, then it's going to be 0. So the gate's going to be closed. So that's kind of the way to think about those things. It can be kind of weird, but very useful if you ever need to use those. Okay, so now we're going to get into some crazier stuff here. Let's go back to a new preset, kind of do the same thing here. Let's bring our cutoff down, and let's grab our envelope and give it a little bit of modulation value, increase our attack and our decay. It's kind of good to do this a couple times to kind of get used to these. And let's take a look at the envelope. So we see that shape, we hear it on the cutoff. Let's give us a little resonance so we can kind of hear a little bit more. Now we have our slope. So the whole time, these are pretty much just linear curves here, just a triangle, right? Now if we change the slope here, we almost have a shark fin going I guess, to the right of the screen. I guess that's how shark moves, right? And then if we also turn this slope the opposite direction, we have the shark fins kind of going the opposite direction. So it's a good way to adjust the curvature of your envelopes, because sometimes on different sounds, those different curves do matter quite significantly. So that's something that you can always dial in if you'd like to. So okay, so now we're going to get into some crazy stuff here. So take a deep breath, and we're going to talk about the input mode, or the input and the modes here. So the whole time I've been firing this envelope or triggering the envelope, it needs a signal to know when to fire it. And the whole time I've been playing notes, and every time it receives a note, and it says, okay, notes received, then fire the envelope and let it do its thing. Now, in addition to that, we can also have the input tell the envelope when to fire. So for example, let's go to LFO1. So basically, whenever LFO1 is going to cross 0 and go into the positive territory, it's going to say to the envelope, fire the envelope. Or I could also fire it with my keyboard. So let's take a look at this here. So let's go to LFO1 and let's put this in the scope here, and let's slow this down to maybe 1/2 so it's a little bit easier to see. And let's pause this here. Okay, so as we're zooming in here and kind of looking at this, this LFO1 is crossing 0 right here, which is the trigger, and it tells the function to open. So it starts to rise, then it starts to decay, and the LFO keeps doing its thing. And as we go to the right here, there's another 0 crossing, and it says, okay, fire the envelope. And the envelope fires, so on and so forth, right? And it just keeps doing that. Now, if I hit some notes, you'll notice that it's kind of really hard to see the function, and that's because every time I'm hitting the note, it's also getting triggered by the LFO, and it's staying below 0, so there's not even a chance for the LFO to cross 0. So it is receiving a signal, but it just cannot cross 0, so it does not fire the envelope. Now, something that is very apparent here, so let's increase our decay a little bit further and further and further. So right here, so this is kind of a mode for the envelope right over here. We cross the 0 as we saw before, and the envelope's going, it does its attack, and it starts decaying. And right here, before it can land on its 0 value, it receives another trigger. So it says, oh, okay, so stop at this decay value, and then just start your attack from there. That's going to be the main difference for this envelope here. And it keeps going, and it receives a signal, it does its attack phase, then it starts decaying, and then right over here, before it even can hit the bottom again, it hits another trigger and says, okay, stop, then start your attack phase once again, and so on and so forth. However, if we go from envelope to one shot, the thing here, as we can see, let's let it run just a little bit more so we can get some more data, and then pause it. Okay, so here is the difference. It receives the signal, it crosses 0, and it says, okay, fire the envelope, it goes up for its attack phase, and it starts decaying. However, right here, it should receive a trigger right over here, but it does not stop. It keeps going and lets it finish its decay, and then it just waits until it receives another trigger, and it does right here, and that's where it restarts again. So that's going to be the main difference between the envelope and the one-shot. So depending on what you're doing, that can have a significant impact on your sound there. So next up, let's kind of remove this LFO1 from the input, and let's just go to cycle trig and unfreeze this. So as we've seen before, it's going to bring down our decay. That's kind of long. Okay, so something like that. So we have our triangles right over here, right? We're not messing with slope or anything. So basically, we're on cycle trig. So it's just cycling and cycling and cycling and cycling over and over and over and over again. However, if we hit some notes, we can still trigger it as well. So in this way, it's kind of almost like we have another LFO at this point, like a triangle LFO. You can kind of use it in the same function because it's still going to be running and running and running and running and so on and so forth. Now, the interesting spot here is if we go to an input and we select LFO1. And let's maybe increase this decay here a little bit here and take a pause and kind of look and see what's happening. So the envelope, or the LFO, is still going to be the trigger. Now, if we go a little bit further here, we see, I guess we could start here, right? So it does its attack because it's cycling here. It's not really telling a trigger right now, but it's also still on input. And it's going up to its attack phase, and it goes down here, and oh, right over here is going to be another crossing, which is getting triggered, which it starts again and kind of continues and continues and goes down. And then it starts its cycle again, because remember we're on cycle trig. So it's going to keep cycling unless it receives a trigger, which it does right here. And then right over here at this point, it stops where it's at decay, and it keeps cycling over and over and over and over again. So we can kind of just take a look and kind of just see how that is how that's working, I guess, in real time. Interesting. So the next one, hopefully this is making sense so far, is we have cycle on off. Now for this one, it's kind of interesting. We get this really kind of weird shape, and if we pause this, we're kind of looking at this like, okay, what is basically happening for this cycle on off? So it's a looping envelope when the input signal is above 0. So for example, we see this LFO here, it's kind of going up, and it kind of wants to do its thing, but it's weird because we're down here in the negative territory, and it just stops this value. We have this flat peak line right here. So if we change the speed of this LFO, let's kind of really drastically keep it kind of low. And then right over here, boom. So it's a very slow LFO, right? Maybe I wish we could zoom out a little bit more. But anyway, it crosses right over here. And then it says, okay, we're in positive territory now, this LFO. Now it's going to do its cycle. It's going to let its thing run and run and run and run, only while the input signal is in the positive direction, right? Let's let this thing keep going, right? It goes and it's doing its cycle thing, and then once it crosses 0, right here, it starts going into the negative territory. So whatever value it was left at last, it's just going to hold that value until we get back into the positive territory, and then it's going to go and continue its cycle and do its thing, so on, so on, so on, so forth. So yeah, let's unfreeze that as well and kind of change the shape here and maybe make it a little bit faster, and you can kind of see how weird some of these shapes can really get. You know, you're kind of still in this LFO, almost time synced kind of thing, because it's really kind of holding the tempo with the first LFO, which is synced to whatever you want it to, and then it's just doing a weird shape with this envelope, which is actually really, really, really cool. So moving on from here, hopefully this is making sense. And next up we have follow. So for example, this is going to, for all intents and purposes, follow the input signal, as we can see here. Now let's take a freeze here. And it's basically taking this input and saying, okay, whatever this input's doing, I want you to do that as well. With exception, we can always change stuff with the attack and the decay. So let's say we want to have another LFO, right? We can put the input as the first LFO and then have this mode on follow. So it's kind of doing the same shape here, but we can do a little stuff with the attack, right? We can make our attack kind of long. So it's trying to follow this, but we also have a slightly longer attack than we do with decay. And it goes, and it goes down again. Or we can do the same thing with the decay. So let's bring our attack kind of back to normal and do maybe a longer decay. So it's still following this LFO. It's just we're kind of contouring it with our attack and decay. And keep in mind, we can also do some interesting slope stuff as well if we want to, like that. We could have some weird little shapes like that, little squigglies, or we can do it the other direction pretty significantly. And make some weird kind of shapes like that, which is really fun because you still have a synced signal, but it just has a different type of shape. And now the last one over here is going to be follow gate. So basically, as you can see, we have frozen this, and the only difference is it's only going to do this follow functionality if the gate is open, which we need to hit a note. So it's basically not doing anything. We hold down the note. Then we have that functionality of follow only while we have a note being played or the gate is open. Once we let go, it keeps it at the last value. And it's kind of cool if you have a longer release too. Because once you let go of the note, then it kind of just holds that value there. So it almost kind of feels a little bit more, I guess, organic in that sort of way. But yeah, so those are the functions. They're a little bit confusing at first. Definitely, like I always say, spend some time with them, kind of get to know one another, and really experiment with these different inputs, right? Seeing what those different inputs can do to trigger these different envelopes and different shapes, because this is quite a long list, so you can do a lot of different stuff here. You can have the mod envelope triggered, you can have the sequence gate triggered, or the sequence mod. You can even have this on a on the mod wheel, the pitch wheel. You can have key follow, so you're playing some notes, and at a certain point, it's going to fire off the envelope depending on what key you press. So like things like that, right? Or the shape sequence A. Whenever this shape sequence gets fired, then that also in turn fires the envelope. So speaking of these shape sequencers, we're going to be talking about that in the next video because you can have a lot of fun with those as well. So if you have any questions about these functions, please let me know because I know they're a little bit confusing. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.